Our next presenter, in addition to being a personal friend, a longtime ally of Lutherans for Life, is, if I may get away with saying this before he comes up to stop me, I think one of the most distinguished public servants that we have as part of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
That's very kind.
Tim Goeglein champions God's welcomed role in the public square, which incidentally is exactly why we invited him to speak. His years of public service and private initiative have been devoted to faith, freedom, and family. Tim serves as Vice President for External and Government Relations at Focus on the Family, and he is deployed in that role to Washington, D.C., but he has served in high-level government posts for 2 decades. If you did not know, he worked as Special Assistant to President George W. Bush, where he was Deputy Director of the White House Office of Public Liaison from 2001 to 2008. He was that president's principal outreach contact for conservatives, think tanks, veterans groups, faith-based groups, hooray, and some of America's leading cultural organizations. Tim was a member of President Bush's original 2000 campaign and White House staff, served for 8 years, has also served as a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation. For those of you who don't know, Heritage Foundation is a conservative think tank in Washington, D.C., and also a professor of government at Liberty University. His new book, which is available out here, is Toward a More Perfect Union, The Moral and Cultural Case for Teaching the Great American Story, which is exactly, every time that I've heard Tim speak, that's what he talks about, the greatness of the American story and the place that we as Christians can have in negotiating that. Prior to that time, from 1988 to 1998, Tim was Deputy Press Secretary, then Press Secretary and Communications Director for U.S. Senator Dan Coates of Indiana. I remember Senator Coates, who was in the Senate for a decade. Between that time in the Senate and the Bush campaign, Tim served as Communications Director for Gary Bauer in his presidential bid. Tim holds honorary doctorate degrees from Concordia University, New York City, that's Bronxville.
That's right.
And Faith Evangelical College and Seminary in Tacoma, Washington, on the left coast. Tim is the Secretary for the Coalitions of America Board, member of the board for the National Civic Arts Society, member of the board of the Family Policy Alliance, member of the board of the governors of Young America's Foundation, yay, we like them, which own and operate the Ronald Reagan Ranch in Santa Barbara, California. Tim also serves on the Institute for American Universities Advisory Board, served as board secretary for the American Conservative Union Foundation, member of the Council for National Policy, Philadelphia Society, and the Capitol Hill Club, where I've had dinner with Tim before.
Yes.
He also serves on the Sanctity of Life Commission for our very own Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. We've served on that together. Board member of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty. Is doing great work on our behalf in Washington, D.C., and has served as a deacon in his church in Northern Virginia for 30 years, Emmanuel in Alexandria. His hobbies include reading, big surprise, tennis, swimming, biking, and the fine arts. The most important thing to know about Tim is that he is married to the love of his life, Jenny, for 31 years, and they have 2 sons, Tim and Paul, one in public policy and one in the fine arts and music. I'm sure he would love to tell you about them as well. But get yourselves ready to hear about the wonderful role that Lutherans can play in this great nation. And join me in welcoming Mr. Tim Goeglein.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. With an introduction like that, I should have the good graces to say thank you and good night. But I won't. I will say, Michael, I was introduced, anybody from Nebraska? I was in that great state just a little over a week and a half ago, and the young woman who introduced me clearly loved Focus on the Family because my introduction was 16 minutes long. And I thought to myself, if only we could, embed this enthusiasm in every American. And by the way, I don't mind saying I'm harnessed with this German name of Goeglein, and whenever I see a Salamanc, it sounds like a German and Dutch law firm. We are holding down the pro-life fort. Michael in the great St. Louis, and I in the swamp, Washington, D.C., where I have lived and worked, and thank you, been deployed for 40 years. I'm in it, but not of it. I want to take a step back, if I may, because I, in behalf of Focus on the Family, where I have been honored to be one of our vice presidents for the last 16 years. My job is external and government relations. That's a fancy way of saying that I spend most of my professional life in the House of Representatives, in the U.S. Senate, at the White House, in the Supreme Court, the think tanks, the public policy groups, working with what we would all call the elite media to help shape and, God bless you, to shape and form stories in behalf of marriage, family, parenting, human life, religious liberty, conscience rights, parental rights, and the now ongoing pronoun battle. I'm very happy to say that Lutherans for Life is not confused about any of the above. And so it's not, by the way, I spend, of the third of my professional life traveling, I spend about 70% before and between groups that are not favorable to our worldview. Michael knows this story. In the year before Dobbs, the great Dobbs, which my new best friend Michelle and I were talking about on the way from the airport, in the few weeks before Dobbs, I was invited to debate in the Yale Political Union on the resolution that Roe versus Wade should be overturned. And as Michael will confirm, in all of my travels and all of my years in public service, I'm an inveterate optimist. And I would say in every single speech that we will live to see Roe versus Wade on the ash heap of history. In fact, I was honored to say it, as Michael knows, in three talks at Lutherans for Life. And I must say that I have the highest possible regard for Lutherans for Life. If I were, a zillionaire, it would be the place that I would champion, as Bezos and Soros do so infamously to people who would undercut everything we believe. And I really honor and esteem everything you do. And you'll probably forget everything I say, except for one thing. Please don't forget this. I'm eager to make it crystal clear that in the Lutheran subculture, we are saddled with a cross to bear. And the cross to bear is for reasons that remain very mysterious to me, that there's a certain segment of Lutherans who are most encouraged when they are not in the public square, when they feel duty-bound to articulate our worldview to people who already agree with us, but who are a little often prudent about going into the public square and engaging one-on-one with people who, if they had authoritarian power, would destroy everything we believe in. And I often say, and I'm eager to give you an example, I often say that it's very unimportant to win a debate in a room of people who already agree with us. And the reason, by the way, maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, but the reason, and I've lived there for 40 years and been involved in our pro-life movement with no exception in all those years, but the reason that Roe versus Wade was overturned, and I give huge credit to Donald Trump and the appointment of 3 Supreme Court justices, to George W. Bush, 2 of those justices of the 6, incredible support among the governors, the member of the House is in the Senate, the great governor of Florida, but, and we're all us, every once in a while Providence clears his throat. And Providence cleared his throat in giving us this remarkable decision on Dobbs. I'm a sailor. I'm a very serious sailor, and I know that I love the sails, and I can put them up, but you better have wind. And the pro-life movement is the wind in the sails. And it is because people like us, and I'm eager to shout this from the rooftops, it's because people like us engaged with people who strongly disagreed with us, and we have been in the streets and in the hallways and in the elevators and on the airwaves and in every possible debate forum for the 50 years that came before Dobbs. And Michael, I really do speak this way. It is providential that we are meeting in the state a few days after the notorious Amendment 4. This is not a coincidence, because, I'm raising my right hand, our pro-life brothers and sisters who, as you know, and you know this from where you come from, overwhelmingly felt that we were going to probably lose all 10 of those ballot initiatives, having lost so many of them before. And I've heard a number of people, and you probably have, say, well, yes, we won in Florida, but that's only because the benchmark was 60% to amend the Constitution versus 51%. I would remind everybody here, let's just pretend we're all best friends, our founding fathers and mothers never is a very dangerous word, never wanted any Constitution amendment unless it was at 60%. In fact, that's why we have the filibuster in the U.S. Senate, right? We are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. And a constitutional republic says you can make changes in your Constitution, but don't do it willy-nilly. I don't know if anybody is here from California. We love our California friends. But it's a way of life in California that they amend their Constitution the way that Elizabeth Taylor went through husbands. You know, I remember when the proverbial ninth husband arrived and she said, "This won't take long," you know. That's how the California Constitution is. And the fact is, and this is a fact, the authors of the Constitution in this great state, and you know this, many of you are Floridians, this is one of our oldest states. People forget that because everybody moves here. But Florida is a very old state, and it is a state, concretely, that keeps in the best, parlance with what our founding fathers wanted. And I don't know if we have, anybody from the other two states, which this time did the right thing on the ballot initiatives. But I think we have to remember something else which is just as big as Florida. And I want to make it very clear that Lutherans for Life and Focus on the Family have another great thing in common, which is that we're nonpartisan, right? But I want to make it very clear that in the history of the United States, we have never is a dangerous word again, we have never had a presidential candidate who has made abortion such a centerpiece of his or her campaign. So far beyond winning and losing on the ballot initiatives, abortion was on the ticket this time. Hand over heart. Don't take my word for it. I'm a wonk and a nerd, so I watch C-SPAN. And I travel a lot, and I listened over and over and over again to Vice President Harris's speeches. Maybe you did. In fact, so many that I forget the number. The centerpiece of I'm going to be very careful. The centerpiece of every one of her speeches was the destruction of the innocent preborn. Every single speech. So let's set aside the ballot initiative debate, which is where big media wants to root the future of our movement, and let's concentrate on a major presidential candidate who's a sitting vice president of the United States, who had the endorsement of all the beautiful people, Oprah Winfrey, Bruce Springsteen, Beyonce. It goes on and on. You didn't know you were part of the beautiful people, right? Welcome to the club, right? If I may say, the Obama coalition, which was in part rooted in the destruction of children. And this is, by the way, this is not surprising to us who are in the pro-life movement. We are the ancestors of the abolitionists. And the abolitionists, just like us, they were used to losing. I did an interview with the Washington Post this morning when I arrived in Orlando. And the reporter, I like her very much, although I said, you have the ability to be smug. And she said, you do too. I said, maybe that's what you think. But I said to her, as you'll see in tomorrow's editions of the Washington Post, if she quotes me, but I said, look, we could have lost all 10 ballot initiatives, and we'll all be there in January, and we will all go back to our states, and we are going to be busy as a beaver until every single child is welcomed into life and protected by the law. And we're going to do this until we get it right. And she said, you sound committed. And I said, you can put that in the paper, Now, I want to tell you all that it's disappointing that our president-elect, who was so committed to our movement, has taken a process stance on the campaign trail. And I think I speak for most of us, maybe all of us, that was disappointing to us. That at some remove, his campaign felt that this issue may be a bit of an albatross around the proverbial neck, okay? But I want to, if I may, come to Florida and to share some really good news. And the really good news is that the presidents in our history who were most influential on the most cutting-edge social issues of their time, with no exceptions, began on the other side. And so we as a pro-life movement will continue in the halls of power to articulate truth to power. And that will include the hallways of the West Wing, where I spent 8 years of my life, which in dog years is about 50,000 years, right? And 10 years in the Senate, that's 75,000 dog years, okay? People in this room, right, we're used to being the minority of the minority. We're used to being called names. We are used to being degraded. We're used to not being invited to all the Hollywood premieres. Okay, fine. On Friday night, my wife and I like to have dinner at Cracker Barrel. I'm a Cracker Barrel guy living in a Whole Foods town. So it just doesn't rankle us, does it? Richard Nixon famously said, if the music is square, it's because we like the music square. So there you are. So in the pro-life movement, as with our abolitionist brethren and sisterin, we are going to continue to articulate, as I say, truth to power, and we are going to continue to advocate what we know to be the right side of history. And you can take this to the bank, there will come a moment, probably when we least expect it, where Providence again will clear his throat. Because, and I'm raising my right hand for the second time, who in this room, and please stand if you're the one, who in this room thought in 2015 or 16 that Donald Trump would be personally responsible for overturning Roe versus Wade? Right, no one's standing because we're all honest, right? If we had a Lutheran apartment complex, we would need locks on the front door. Yeah. So I'm just telling you, as sure as I'm standing here, it may take 5 years, and it may take 50, but you know what? In the long annals of time, that's a snap of the fingers to God Almighty, right? Lincoln famously was asked, remember, Lincoln was not an abolitionist for most of his public life, right? Lincoln was asked in a very important debate, why are you against slavery, right? And he said 2 reasons. It's immoral and it's unjust, right? But, he said, it's also bad policy. Think about this. We have the lowest marriage rates in American history. We have the lowest fertility rates in American history. We're in the middle of a baby bust, okay? We're going to get this right, too. It's going to take a while, but we're going to get this right because God made us for relationships and God made us for families, right? So take heart. Now, I want to share something, if I may, and it's the reason that I wrote my 4th book, which I know you and your 50,000 best friends want to read and buy. It's getting a lot of attention, by God's grace. Just did a book talk at Hillsdale College, which was just on C-SPAN for the 3rd time. I love C-SPAN. And I want to share with you, if I may, why I wrote Stumbling Toward Utopia. And I think it fits in almost perfectly with our meeting today. I said to you a little while ago that I travel a lot for Focus on the Family. And I speak and meet and debate and part of panels and do media and all these things. Okay. I'm not a betting man, which may not surprise you. But dollars to donuts, in almost every single venue in which I speak, left wing, right wing, no wing, when you get to the Q&A, somebody of goodwill will raise his or her hand and say something like the following: how in the world did we get into this mess? Yeah, everybody's doing this in this room. Yeah. Now, in most chapters of American history, a speaker would have to say, can you be more specific? But these days, you don't have to be more specific, all right? So after this very large debate I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, anybody from Oklahoma? What a fine state. I never knew one state could have so much oil and so many earthquakes, you know. Okay. So I got onto the airplane, and I asked the steward. By the way, I know people in this room fly. They have the smallest cocktail napkins in world history. They're these tiny little, why even have a napkin? It defeats the purpose, doesn't it? It's like, having Kool-Aid out of a thimble. I mean, it's very strange. And but at any rate, so I asked for a stack of napkins because I was determined that after the flight took off, in those 3 hours, I was going to answer in an outline form, and which became the book that I'm telling you about, the answer to how we got into this mess. And I'm going to do a very short riff as it relates to life and engagement in the public square about how we got into this mess. And the answer, are you ready for this, is the moral and social revolution of the 1960s and 70s. Okay? Now, I know there's a couple of people in this room, do not stand, who have a little gray hair. Okay. And probably, some of you probably lived through the 60s or have some faint whiff of this radical decade. Okay. By the way, it spills over into the 70s. And what I found, as you will see in the book, the golden narrative of Stumbling Toward Utopia is that if you want to really define and answer the question, where did the 60s and 70s come from, as the catalyzer to why did we get into this mess in 21st century America, what you will find, as I found in all my reading and research, is that at the turn of the 20th century, less than 100 years before the 60s, there were a handful of extremely influential Americans who did not like the United States. But as they are babies with loaded pistols, they were well-funded, very influential, and very powerful. And they set out to transform our country. By the way, in the most powerful way that you can possibly imagine. Now, in the interest of time, let me give you, I'm a Lincoln man. I'm a Lincoln Republican. So let me define, among all my fellow friends and pro-lifers, what happened. Anybody here ever heard of Woodrow Wilson? Yeah, okay. The man who never should have been president. Okay. I guess that's partisan, but okay, he's deceased. 1912, president of Princeton University, governor of New Jersey, the ultimate smug, condescending progressive. You've probably met one or two. Okay. He believed that the Constitution was outdated. He believed that the Declaration of Independence was outdated. He said the United States of America should be run by experts, not citizens. Sound familiar? Yeah. Right. He was a utopian. That's why I call the book Stumbling Toward Utopia, from Sir Thomas More's famous book, Utopia Means No Place. That's the irony of it. Progressives have in common the perfectibility of man. We all know in this room not from smugness, but humility, there was only one perfect man, the God-man, Jesus Christ. And anybody else who thinks that we can eventually get to perfectibility of man is on a fool's errand. But these people meant business. And Woodrow Wilson said that the three branches of government were a form of bad manners, that it really ought to be like an American prime minister. And he transformed his presidency into exactly that. He wanted to change American politics. Anybody here ever heard of the ACLU? I bet a few of us have, right? The anti-Christian whatever? No. Yeah. It's with all euphemisms, the ACLU, right? Their founder plays a big part in my book, as you will see, Roger Baldwin, right? You should know that name. Most Americans have forgotten it if they ever knew. He was a very committed communist. And he was extremely uncomfortable with faith, but particularly very uncomfortable with the impact of Christianity on the law, legal, and justice system. And he sent out, through the ACLU, to create a new American legal system that would seek to erase Christianity, the Judaic-Christian tradition, from the public square. And I think we can say that the ACLU has been very successful. By the way, for purposes of our gathering, how many of you know the name Margaret Sanger? Yes, especially in this room. By the way, you should know, when I travel and I mention Margaret Sanger, most people have no idea who I'm talking about, right? Yeah, none, okay? The founder of Planned Parenthood, a eugenicist, sound familiar? A eugenicist, a racialist of the first order. She was very uncomfortable. I'm a German Lutheran, you know. She was very uncomfortable with legal immigrants. She was very uncomfortable with immigrants having children. She was very uncomfortable with any family having more than one child. That's radical at the turn of the 20th century. And she knew that, and she felt very strongly, that she could create and condition an environment where abortion could be a perfect tool for the elimination of the children of the people who she disdained. By the way, as you'll see in the book, her impact on white Anglo-Saxon American Christianity, right? Methodists, Presbyterians down the line. She sought to change the seminaries because they knew that, she said, if they can change the seminaries, they'll change the churches. And boy, look at the former main line in our country. Yep, there on Sunday, but no one's there. Same on Wednesday nights. And by the way, all the faithful who came before them paid off those mortgages, so they're big landholders, and no one's there. They have taken out Orthodox Christianity and replaced it with progressivism. And by the way, and this is very important, Margaret Sanger and that bad idea matrix, ideas have consequences. Good ideas have consequences, bad ideas have consequences. It was part of her vision that we would have a sexual revolution in the United States. And as I stand at this podium today, that is the most consequential, devastating impact on our nation's history from the 60s, the sexual revolution. The frontal assault on marriage, family, parenting, and human life. And I want to stress this. As you'll see in the book, this was not a coincidence. It wasn't an evolution toward this America and this America. This was part of the plan. By the way, I'm an American. I love the movies. The first 1 million years in heaven will be watching Turner Classic Movies, okay? It's kind of a continuous loop of Casablanca, okay, yeah. You know, Casablanca, best year, sorry? The Searchers. Yeah, oh, The Searchers. My friend, I'm the greatest fan of John Wayne you've ever met. Yeah, and by the way, that's John Wayne's greatest film. Do you agree?
I agree.
Is there a greater combination?
The greatest Western ever made.
My friend, I've come to the right meeting. In fact, may I say?
I like the Shooters too.
So, oh, the Shooters, I put that number 4. Yeah, but I'm a huge fan. Huge fan. Yeah, huge fan, right? The Duke, right? I mean, to make the Green Berets in the middle of the Vietnam War, this is a Courage of Lions. Anyway, but in the 60s, as part of the sexual revolution, the production code was cut. And guess what happened in 1969? You're right. An X-rated movie was given the Oscar of the Year. Yeah. See how fast this can change? And the sexual revolution is the reason, I want to repeat this, the sexual revolution and the idea matrix is the reason that we got Doe v. Bolton and Roe v. Wade. People were working on the imposition of abortion in our nation, as we all know, long before 1973. Variously, for 75 years. So, hand over heart for a second time. All of our fellow pro-lifers who seem to be discombobulated by the fact that Dobbs didn't outlaw abortion, let us not be confounded or confused. Major social cultural change takes a long time. Okay. By the way, one last figure, John Dewey. Right? He said, American education is not about reading, writing, arithmetic, and science. It's about the creation of the new citizen. Erase faith, erase religion, and create a new citizen. By the way, I want to be categorical. I mean categorical. Christianity, overwhelmingly, among every single one, this is a big statement, among every single one of our founding fathers and mothers, I want to emphasize this, Christianity categorically was welcomed, was given great entree in every one of our public institutions. That this idea that you could not post or speak about the Ten Commandments in schools, not a single founding father or mother ever would have found any dispute with that. Ever. Reading the Bible, knowing the Ten Commandments, that was considered foundational to what is the purpose of education? The creation of the good citizen, right? That if you want to have liberty and freedom over time, you've got to inculcate virtue in the rising generation of young Americans. Moral goodness. Where does moral goodness come from? In the American experience, in Christianity. Those are facts, right? Remember our second president, John Adams, said facts are stubborn things, right? So we get to the 60s and the 70s, and all these terrible, influential ideas were incubating, and they all exploded in the 60s. Anybody here ever hear of Woodstock? Yeah, right? Sex, drugs, rock and roll. Rolling around in the mud, shooting each other with pistols, right? Acid, smack, dope, yippies, hippies. It was wild. By the way, I've been living in the 60s for 3 years in preparation for the book, and I've been speaking about it. And I know there's some in this room. I promise you, I could do 4 more books. I have collected so many extraordinary stories of people who lived through the 60s. I'm going to share one very briefly. A fellow Missouri Lutheran, just was with him last week. Can you imagine? He was in the ROTC on the campus of Kansas State in 1969. And he said, and I'm quoting him, he said, it was dangerous to walk from our dormitory to our classroom if we had our uniforms on. This is Kansas, right? Much less Berkeley, or Columbia University. It goes on and on, right? By the way, there will come a moment, it will happen, that in the way that and I'm a German, so you travel to Germany, you got to go to Dachau or Auschwitz, or we're morally obliged, right? But someday, when Roe is completely overturned, Americans in rooms just like this will say, now, just a minute, you didn't have 70 million abortions. That's not possible. In the history of the definition of civilization versus barbarism, that didn't happen. It couldn't have happened. Hitler could not have really exterminated 5 million people just because that couldn't have happened, right? Stalin could not have killed 25 million or 65 or, See where we're going? Right. So we have a duty to history, a strong duty, and we will be vindicated by God's grace. May I tell you, that's the 60s and 70s, and there's so much more to say. By the way, one thing, has anybody ever been in a conversation where someone says to you, isn't it a shame that we're all so polarized? Anybody had it? Yeah, we all have. Okay. Mostly from progressives. Isn't that a shame? Right. May I tell you, as I said, I live in the People's Republic of Alexandria, Virginia. It's as blue as my coat. I love all of our progressive neighbors. They're fine. But I mean, we just don't agree. And by the way, we have an American flag in front of that's really dicey, isn't it? And I had a neighbor recently move in. I promise. He said, psst, like that. He said, I was out mowing the grass. Can I ask you a question? I said, anything. He said, you have an American flag. I said, yes, we do. He said, does that mean you're a Republican? Like, wow. Yeah. E.T. phone home. Yeah. The thing to say is the following. I am an inveterate optimist. And I would say what I'm saying to you, if we had not had, and I'm saying the royal we, so forgive me, if we had not had the Tuesday or Wednesday like we had this week, we are meeting at a genuinely, gigantically historic time in the United States, like by any objective measure. But I would make the same statement if we were having President-elect Harris, right? The best days for our country are ahead of us. They are. And we are duty-bound in the pro-life movement. We have to go tell a new generation. That's our call and mission. Because I have learned that anybody who wants the next generation is going to get them. And please take my word for it, as sure as I am standing in front of you. Progressives have a plan for the next generation. And their number one target, I know the group and demographic I'm speaking to. Dr. Dobson, the founder of Focus on the Family. I've written 4 books, he's written 55. Okay. Dr. Dobson told me that the most difficult book he ever wrote was Bringing Up Girls. He also wrote Bringing Up Boys. But I said, why? He said, I'll tell you why. Because the further you get into this, the further you realize what the glitterati and culture want to do to young girls. Okay? My right hand for the final time. Let us be shocked and sobered by the demography of young women who voted for the progressives. It's not a coincidence. Okay? In social media, and I know you know this, but I'm honor-bound to say it in light of my new book. In social media, abortion, which is never discussed as abortion, it's a euphemism. Reproductive freedom, you know all the euphemisms. Okay. But, and this is very important, in social media, abortion means freedom. And so, across all platforms, when young girls are being propagandized and misinformed about the biggest civil rights issue of our time, they don't ever have to think about what abortion is. And I'm always astonished. This is not rhetoric. I'm always astonished when all of us say, if they only knew. Okay, trust me. A huge percentage of Americans, huge, in this extraordinary, remarkable, incredible country, they know what abortion is. Okay? They do. But another sizable, measurable percentage, they have no idea because they never have to think about it. Right? Anybody here know the famous, and I think it's very well done, film on William Wilberforce, the man who was single-handedly responsible for the abolition of the slave trades? You remember that, I'm sorry? Yeah, okay. You remember in this great film William Wilberforce and his fellow abolitionists in England, they can't get the attention of the political class. They can't get the attention of people in the streets. They're talking about slavery, but no one can seem to get it. Do you remember how they finally get their attention? They take the glitterati and beautiful people on a boat ride in the Thames. And instead of a nice little potluck lunch, where do they go? They go down to the docks where the slaves come in. And a mile before they get to the docks, they begin to smell the stench of the reality of what all the beautiful people have been unthinkingly defending. And we're in the social... Think about the world we are in. We see everything on that little rectangle that is chained to our wrist. We see everything. What don't we see? We know the answer. It begins with the word A, the letter A, and ends with the word N. Isn't it ironic? It's Orwellian. It's Orwellian that the woman who just spent how many hundreds of millions of dollars to be the president of the leading nation in world history, she never had to describe once what she mostly defends, vociferously defends. That's weird. The media want to hear about her tax plan, and they want to hear about her border plan. They want to hear about all the plans. But they never have to really hear from the woman who wants to be the leader of the free world why it is she defends what she defends. And we know why that is, right? Because it's indefensible. That's why, right? George Orwell famously said that the first duty of an intelligent man is to restate the obvious. So we know, as the pro-life movement, that we have a moral duty to be intelligent. And we have to go tell a new generation what the stakes are. And I want to be very clear, because I know that Focus and that Lutherans for Life have this in common. We have to do it civilly, magnanimously, and graciously. Verbally or physically, putting our knuckle into the proverbial chest will never change a heart or mind. But while we're being civil and magnanimous, Michelle and I were having this conversation, we also have to be unapologetic. That's hard to do. I say this with great humility. It's not easy going into the Yale Political Union, where 2/3 of the undergraduates and law students in front of you vociferously disagree with you, right? But we are all deployed where God wants us to be deployed. And we have to go and we have to make our case in a way that is persuasive to the next generation. And in large measure, that's why I wrote Stumbling Toward Utopia. Because it's not just about understanding how we got into this mess, but it's also, because I think we're honor-bound as Christians, with Christ at the center of everything we do, we are also honor-bound toward restoration, renewal, and the way forward. And if we're going to have an American restoration on this big topic, then we're going to have to succeed in the areas of persuasion. And I think we're going to achieve it. Yeah. So, my friends, at the expense of lecturing or sermonizing or attempting to be Solomonic, I will happily answer or duck a few questions. Thank you all very much. Now, as I said 3 times, we're all best friends, so no one has to be shy. We'll just pretend we're at the Thanksgiving table. And someone has to be kind enough to go first with any question. And if you agree, that will make me very happy. But if you disagree, it will make me easily happy, because in this room we still believe in the Bill of Rights.
So you're talking about the Ian Griffith movie, Mr. Fantastic? He was in the William Wilberforce movie?
That's not the one I'm thinking of. What is the name of it?
Amazing Grace.
Amazing Grace. Yes, Amazing Grace is what I'm thinking of.
I thought that was Ian Griffith.
Well, no, forgive me. William Wilberforce is such a great figure. There may be many movies about him, but the one I'm thinking about is Amazing Grace.
It's the same movie.
Say again. Oh, it is.
You're both right.
Oh, my friend, this is like Jeopardy. We both hit the button at the same time. Yeah. But I'll let you win. Yeah. But what did you want to ask about? Or you're just asking about the name of the movie?
Yeah, because I saw it.
And what did you think?
I thought it was great.
Uh-huh.
And you're right out there in the middle of the people that don't know any better and played in public movie theaters.
Right.
It was great.
We have an American corollary. And anybody here ever heard of John Quincy Adams? We've only had two sons of presidents, right? John Quincy and the one I worked for, George W. And George W. was two-term, John Quincy Adams was one-term. But John Quincy Adams was the most consistent abolitionist in the House of Representatives. By the way, of our first 7 presidents, only the 2 Adamses were abolitionists. The other 5 all owned slaves. Okay, and most of them substantial owners of human beings.
Paul Giamatti was in the mini
Yes, he was. Yes. And so, but the thing I wanted to mention is that Quincy Adams, after he lost the presidency, was in the House of Representatives for 25 years and a very effective member of the House. And he was the most consistent abolitionist. In fact, you all may know that famously, as a great lawyer like his father, John Adams, he defended the mutineers of one of the most famous slave ships, the Amistad, before the Supreme Court. You know, that's a brave Adams. And in the 19th century. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that Adams was asked, you keep introducing the abolitionist legislation every term, and you know that the slave interests control the House of Representatives, so we are never going to consider your bill. So why do you keep doing this? And I think, Michael, his answer could be part of the mission statement of Lutherans for Life. He said, duty is ours, results are God's. And isn't that the mission of the pro-life movement? And I think that Wilberforce and Adams embody this great virtue. Yeah.
So I don't want to get too deep into the woods, but the principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places, they must be behind Thomas Dewey, and they must be behind Margaret Sanger, John Dewey, sorry, and George Soros. He appears to be filled with a legion, like the demoniac that Jesus drove out all the demons from.
I'm always struck in John's revelation that that we know that Lucifer was thrown from heaven and ultimately was defeated. That's why we're in this room. But defeated, period. But our metaphysics is an eternal view. This side of eternity, Lucifer and evil are real, though defeated ultimately, but real in the lives of all of us. And I think it is not an overstatement to say that abortion is the single greatest evil currently in the United States. I believe that, and I'm assuming you do as well. And I believe with you, categorically, that this is satanic. I think it is demonic. Absolutely. It's why, and maybe you all feel the same, that when the political class gets into these debates about, now what number of weeks do you support? You know, now, I mean, like most of us can agree on third trimester. I mean, I'm asking you all, this is rhetorical. Do we think that Jesus ever said, well, you know, the third trimester, it defies, discernment and wisdom are gifts to us, and we ought to employ them. And we need a political class that needs to be wiser, but they need to have the courage of lions.
That's what I remember George Washington saying
Yes.
about his army, that the essence of being a patriot is to be a Christian.
Yes.
And we need that now because you can't replace something with nothing. Just like driving out the evil spirits, if you don't have the Holy Spirit come in, then it's going to be worse than before.
I'll say again, you've come to the right meeting. I want to be very clear on this point. I mean, like decisive, if I may. My late great friend Chuck Colson said to me, don't be critical of the fraternity brother who is drowning in his own vomit after one of these crazy parties this Friday night, because he's probably the very guy who God will raise up and use in some extraordinary way in the future. And I think our faith teaches us that God consistently in the pro-life movement has often used the most unlikely person or persons to do great work in advancing our cause. So I'm confident in that regard. I know time-wise. One more? Can we do one more? Yeah, okay. Or two more. Yeah, yes. I could do this all day, but...
So some of us, in the days following the election, noticed online that there's some extreme reactions.
Yes.
And we've talked about, some of us have talked about things all ranging from, I'm horrified that Amendment 4 failed, and I'm so furious that I won't even talk about it, all the way to, I'm 36 weeks pregnant, I'm due in, a couple of weeks, and I'm thinking about aborting my child because I'm so angry about the way that this came out.
Right.
I can't imagine having a boy right now. This is horrific. As someone who can't comprehend, especially being that far along in a pregnancy and even not having that love for your child, how do we reach people who don't want to listen at this point? Or is it even worth trying to reach those people, and instead we should be focusing our attention on the younger generation, as you mentioned?
I'm honored to be asked that question, and I'm not being diplomatic or political by saying that it's not an either or, it's a both and, right? And I'm saying this not derisively, but in support of the base of what you're asking. We're the pro-life movement. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. Yeah. And my answer is the following. There are people in this room, perhaps you as well, who have devoted your vocation to persuading young men and young women, often at the most vulnerable, crushingly difficult moment of their lives, to make a decision that in that moment they do not see as being rational relative to their current situation or the future. And in my strongly held view, in that moment, I do not believe in the pro-life movement that our job, and I'm not suggesting you're saying it is our job, but our job, in my view, is not debate, is not talking points and whatever. And this is going to sound very trite, but I mean it to be the opposite. It is to pour the love of Jesus Christ into that person at that moment, and to trust that the Holy Spirit can do the impossible. But even if it doesn't go the way that we want it, my view is that the love of Christ is so powerful that even in that moment, if we don't end up with the result that we want, that the Holy Spirit is so great that over time, years afterward, this person might then understand. It's one of the great mysteries of life, isn't it? But the most important thing in my own vocation is, and I'm going to be very specific, unapologetically, we have to continue to make the case. And it's so difficult to do when someone's posting something and whatever. It's so difficult to do because we want to strike back, and we want to, we have a sense of almost being incredulous that you could even have this opinion. Welcome to humanity. No, I really mean, my friend, I promise you, I promise, in the Civil War, where we lost 700,000 men in a country that had, 13 million people? Okay. We had brothers shooting each other at point blank in peach orchards. So, as Americans, we have faced these incredibly tough moments in social policy, and I just ultimately believe that it's about the love of Jesus Christ. I really believe that. And the Word of God has a power all its own. It's just so mysterious. You know the name Alexander Solzhenitsyn, right? The Nobel-winning dissident, eventually Soviet writer. He went into the Gulag Archipelago, Stalin's worst prisons, the worst prisons in the history of mankind. He went in as a dissident, but he was also an unbeliever. He came out of the worst prison experience that we know of in the 20th century. He lived by God's grace. And the day he was released, he turned to the prison and he said, "Bless you, prison, bless you." Because in this worst moment of human suffering that anybody could even contemplate, Christ showed up. So if Christ can show up in the gulags at minus 30 degrees, Christ can show up to a distressed, remarkable 36-week woman who's not at that moment seeing the love of Christ. Yeah. Okay, one more?
Well, we can't.
Oh, we can't. Okay, yeah, okay. God bless.
You got nowhere to go.
Yeah. Oh.
Fantastic. Fantastic.